Hello, everyone. I am so excited to share with you today the expertise of Colleen Smith from ChildLight Yoga. I'm so excited to be here today. We're going to talk today about a really important topic that we are seeing more so now, I want to say, Colleen, than we have in the past. It's about how do we reduce anxiety, specifically in the early childhood classroom. And no doubt, while we're talking through, it's going to be able to apply to all the ages, but we're kind of just going to narrow in on that age group and specifically about anxiety, but it also may cover, we might talk about dysregulation, stress, and that kind of thing,
Yeah.
all encompassing mental health. Colleen, let's start with you. Thanks so much for being here. And let's start with you. Let's talk about your background, your work, and your passion, and kind of what brought you here today. Because I'm sure that your work with ChildLight also has you working with other areas. So I'd love to hear more about your work.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. You're right. This is a very timely topic. Um, if I go back a little bit, I have a master's degree in school counseling. So I was an elementary school counselor for a few years before I had children. And then I took a break to raise my children and found yoga. And so I've been teaching, and then I started training to be a kids yoga teacher back when, like, this is 24 years ago. So it wasn't really a thing.
Yeah.
But I've been teaching kids yoga for that long, and it's grown exponentially during that time. Um, I started with ChildLight. I'm going to lose track of time, but it was maybe 6 or 7 years ago.
Right.
And that's been fantastic too. But for me, I have a business called BeLive Yoga that I teach out of my home for. And I contract with school districts. I do a lot of preschool yoga classes. I teach at the upper elementary levels too. I do teach middle school and high school, but it tends to be kind of towards the lower end on a regular basis. And through Syracuse University, we are working on a pilot study right now that I'm a part of, which is really interesting. And I was an adjunct professor teaching yoga and mindfulness last year for Syracuse University. So I got to teach college kids, which
Wow.
was fantastic and not surprisingly not that different than when you're teaching little kids. They loved everything to do with kids yoga. Um, I have three adult children, and we all kind of have had anxiety at some point. You know, looking back in my life, I was an anxious kid, but we didn't have that wording then. It was
Yes.
just
Right.
Colleen had habits, that I needed to deal with or whatever. I do have a son who has ADHD and anxiety, and he is my greatest teacher.
Mm.
And I've learned a great deal from him. He's 25 now, and I am still learning from him every day.
Mhm.
And that's kind of where my passion started, was trying to help find ways to help my children and myself.
Mm.
And then recognizing that children of all ages are experiencing anxiety and how we can help them to
Mhm.
self-regulate with all of the big emotions that they are feeling.
Right.
And yeah, and through all of that, just seeing how to there when the light bulb goes on in their brain and
Mm.
they notice how taking a deep breath can make them feel. Or
Mm.
when you talk to them and they're like, Miss Colleen, I showed someone at
Mm.
home, belly breath. And when they start to recognize how it can help them, I love that. And I love being able to be in an early age so that they can have those tools for the rest of their life. Even if, like my kids at
Yeah.
middle school, they were like, I'm not doing this anymore, mom.
Right.
They've
Right.
all come back to it.
Right. Yes. I love that intersection, Colleen, of your school counseling because you have a deep understanding of child development and the big emotions. You understand children in a different way, bringing together the children yoga teaching. So you've got a deep understanding of the philosophy, bringing together those pieces, and then being a mom. So those three together are such a beautiful gem of experience to bring together. And I love what you said there about with the middle schoolers. So my daughter is in seventh grade, 12. She's never wanted to do anything with yoga mindfulness, but what you said there, we don't even know the seed that we're planting. So for example, she knows that I talk about, I've experienced more anxiety over the last, I want to say 5, 10 years than I have noticed of myself before. but I'll just say, I need to take a deep breath, or, I'll start to model my own regulation when she's dysregulated. She's also on the spectrum, ADHD, anxiety, depression, all those things. So those are diagnoses, but how she shows up is she's more of everything. So very expressive, big feelings, loud, she's the polar opposite of me, right? But what the point is that recently she was at a sleepover and she was saying, woke up in the middle of the night and her friend couldn't get back to sleep. It was like 2 o'clock in the morning because her friend was nervous about getting up for soccer in the morning. So my daughter said she taught her a few deep breaths to go back to sleep. And Colleen, like, those moments as a mom, you're like screaming inside and you have to be cool because you got a middle schooler, right? But she would never have done that with me. But the fact that you don't even know what they're doing out there in the world,
Right.
so it's pretty cool that you're modeling this way of life, right? So it's not only just that you're in a class teaching, but it's who you be in the world. And that's making a difference, right?
And I'm so glad you mentioned that, because she's hearing that, she's seeing you,
Right.
she's learning it, and it's in there somewhere, and it's there when she needs it. And there's always some kid in the class who is just hanging out, whether it's in a school or it's in a studio. And I tell this to teachers and parents all the time. That's okay. They're learning it. This was my son. My son got dragged to yoga classes all the time when he was little. I'm teaching, so he's coming with me.
Yeah.
He sat in the back, didn't want to do it. I'm like, you are not a good advertisement for
right.
this.
Right.
But he learned it. And those are the
Yeah.
kids that go home and show people at home what they
Yes.
did, even though they
Right.
didn't do it.
Yes. I love that.
Yeah.
So true. So let's talk more about anxiety, right? So we're seeing this. What's from a school counseling perspective, what's at the cause? Because we know about this idea of, under the iceberg, we're seeing the behaviors on top and really what's underneath that. So instead of just addressing what we're seeing, because I was in a classroom yesterday, oh my gosh, teacher subbing, and it is full on this one class. It really just depends. You get some classes seem to be regulated and on plan and expected, and some are it's just a dynamic, right? And explosive. So but those are the behaviors above. What's underneath that? Sort of what's going on, and how is it showing up?
I think it's a lot of things. I think there's a lot of factors in the world. And even though sometimes we try to shelter our kids from world events, they see it. They see it, they hear it. So I think that can be a lot of it. Our kids pick up on their parents' mood and reactions to things, conversations. We had a code for my son who has ADHD. You wouldn't think he was paying attention because he was not looking at you. He's watching TV or he's off doing something else. And my husband would start talking about something and I would say ears, because I knew that he was there and he was hearing. Because sometimes, you're not even talking to them and all of a sudden they chime in.
Right.
And so I think
so
kids
true.
just pick up on the vibe and they pick up on what we're saying, conversations that we have with other people. I also think I had an interesting conversation with a teacher before I left today, a 4-year-old teacher before I left school today. And I said to her, she was talking about the needs in her classroom and how this is the most anxious classroom that she's ever had. These are 4-year-olds. And she said, regulation that they need. And I said, I see that too. And I said, what do you think it's from? And I said, do you think that the pandemic has impacted this? Because for the last few years, in conversations with people, I've been saying it's going to be really interesting to see what these young children are like. And there is a difference. If anybody works with 3 or 4-year-olds, there is a big difference, and that's what she said. She said that, so the 4-year-olds, they were like a year to 2, and staying home. So they missed out on social interactions when they would see people. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, exactly. So they had to wear masks. Their parents were wearing masks when they were out and about.
They didn't learn facial expressions.
Right.
Young.
Yeah.
And she brought up the point that parents were working from home. So they weren't used to being away from parents. A lot of times they were put in front of a screen of some sort because parents had, we were in survival mode. We had to
Of
do what we had
course.
to do.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think that it's going to be interesting to see how much of an impact that did have. I also think, you know, anxiety can be from so many different things, and it's different for everybody.
Mm.
And I've learned that from my son. Looking back, I didn't have the tools that I have now or the understanding that I have now. I wish that I did, because I would have done
Mm.
some things differently. But I always say to myself, I give myself grace and say, I did the
Yeah.
best with what I knew and what I had at the time.
Right.
But just because something wasn't upsetting my other children or wasn't making my other children anxious didn't mean that it wasn't real for him. Sorry,
Yeah.
the son is like, I love
Yeah.
the son, but
Yeah.
there we
Yeah. No, that's fine.
go.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's just things that we don't understand, or it doesn't make sense to us.
Mm.
And it can be so different. We don't know. I think it's so individual and it's so
Mm.
experiential. We don't know what goes on at somebody's house. We don't know what happened in the morning or the
Mm.
night before, or what they're worried about later on that day.
Right.
So I think it can be so many different things. The way that it's showing up from what I've seen in the classrooms and what teachers and counselors have said to me, because I have conversations with them often, is some acting out, a lot of acting out and misbehavior or misbehaving, stubbornness, refusal to comply, refusal to do something. When that is alarming for me is when it's somebody that I've known for a couple of years and they have always done yoga and always cooperated, and all of a sudden they aren't, and they just have this look on their face, and I'm like, okay, what's up? Big emotions, you know, experiencing big emotions like crying or yelling, and having those intense reactions to little events that don't warrant such a big reaction normally.
Yeah, exactly. And I think too, it's also, like you said, the adults in the room. So as teachers, so like the level of demand and the stress and the overscheduling, everything. And so you can't help but wonder if there's some effect of the adult in the room, the teachers. And also I'm curious about genetics. So personally, I know my mom was a very anxious person. I didn't really know, I didn't acknowledge this and probably until her later in her life, but she talked about, you know, when she was growing up, her parents grew up in England. She was born in England, and then they had the bombs falling on them in
Yeah.
London. And so she talked about that thread. So I think,
Mm-hmm.
okay, so we've established, and everybody knows, right? There's a lot of anxiety and dysregulation in the world and
Right.
stress. So now what do we do from here? How do we I'm an optimistic person, right? And I gotta know that there's something we can do, or some way to be. So it's not just the doing, but it could be the opposite of taking these sacred pods. Anyway, I want to hear from you. So what are your top tips on how do we tackle this anxiety in the early childhood classroom?
Yeah. So there's three that I love. I'm going to have to move to do one of them. And one that I do want to mention, because some people don't recognize this too, is the physical manifestations of anxiety, the stomach aches. You know, my
Oh
son
yeah,
in sixth grade, he was at the nurse's office like almost every
same.
day in January.
Same.
You know?
September. Yep, my daughter every day in September. Yep.
So stomach aches, headaches, those kind of things. And
Yeah.
you know, to genetics, yes. I mean, I have some anxiety too. Mine usually shows up as a stomach ache or a migraine. So I do think that genetics play a part in it. Three things, and I'll kind of I know at the end you want to talk about advice for teachers, so we'll maybe loop back to this. But one thing, and I've given all my teachers breathing balls,
Yeah.
so that in New York State, this just came out. Yoga Journal reported on this. All schools are supposed to be, or maybe it was New York City, I may be getting this wrong, but are
Yeah.
supposed to be teaching breathing. Did you see that?
Yes, yes. Early this year. And there's some controversy about it. It's not, yeah, it's kind of
Yeah.
mixed, came out with mixed reviews.
Yeah, and I'm interested to hear more about that and why there are mixed reviews. But like, I was in the classrooms today and I saw, you know, posters up about belly breathing. People
Oh,
are starting
great.
to realize how important belly breathing is. And
Right.
so as a tool, you know, I'm sure that you use these as well.
Yeah.
you know, the Hoberman spheres, the breathing balls, because kids love these. As I was leaving, one of the teachers was trying to calm a classroom again, and she got it out. And she's like, okay, we're going to do like Miss Colleen. So breathing balls, teaching belly breathing, and then moving on from there, and other breathing techniques can be really, really helpful. Before I stand up, because one involves standing up. I don't know, the sunshine might not show up, but a glitter bottle like this, all the kids will ask for this. And I had some really busy classrooms today, especially with Christmas coming up and the holidays. We have a lot of special needs in the classes. This calms the kids down like nothing else. So I think glitter bottles are something that they can watch, because when they're watching this, and if they're watching quietly and it becomes a mindful activity, it takes their attention to this and away from what is bothering them. And then you can loop in some quiet, calm breathing with it as well.
Right. Exactly. And they're also on these ones you've made. I know my friend Lonnie from Full of Joy Yoga, she has a great recipe on her website, but there's also just on Amazon, if you just want a quick one, there's those bubble droppers too, which are really easy. So how do you use it exactly? Are you using one of them with the whole class? Are you kind of having them in a circle, or how do you use it exactly?
So I used to pass the breathing ball around before COVID, and then we stopped doing that so much. So right now I just am up in the front of the classroom, and I will say to them, do you want me to do it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So they're usually sitting crisscross applesauce, and we'll say they sit like this, as most people do when they're trying to relax or they're just not paying attention. So we'll say, imagine there's a string on top of your head that pulls you up to the ceiling. So you sit up straight and tall, put one hand on your belly and one hand on your chest. If they're little kids, it's up here. So I say, this is your neck, slide down to the flat spot. That's your chest. And I'll tell them to keep their hands there to feel their breath. And as my ball gets big, take a nice, slow, deep breath in. And as the ball gets small, breathe out nice and slow. And we do several of those. We can also talk about how when we're feeling anxious or upset, our breath becomes quick, and how nice calming breaths look like this. And this is what we practice, so that in those moments, we can take a nice calm breath. That's really important. We need to teach the kids when they're not upset, where they're not anxious. They need to learn beforehand. And the same with this, we just have it up in the front. Today, somebody asked me if we could open it so they could see what was in it. And I was like, no, we're not going to do that. The teachers were like, no, it'll be all glitter.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And one more movement. So we've got, breathing, we have a mindfulness activity, and then there's a movement that we can do. I can just do it sitting, but is washing machine, or in Tai Chi, it's called empty coat sleeves.
Yeah.
Where we're just twisting. And we can make a noise like a washing machine, like ch, 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 ch. And then we slow it down. That is a great way to help move some extra energy through the body. It can be a great way to release anxiety. It's also grounding. It can help you remember where your body is in space. And so I do those, and the teachers, for the most part, are with us when we're doing that. So they learn them, and I'll say, washing machine's really great for anxiety, and washing machine's really great to get rid of extra energy, with the hopes that maybe they will start incorporating it when they see the need.
That's exactly right. That's the key here, right? It's not just for the children, but it really is for the teacher. Take those moments, take a deep breath. Get your thoughts together so that you can be at your best, right? When the classroom is chaotic, you can't possibly be at your best, right? You need to take those moments. I was there yesterday. I know full well. So talk to us about a success story. Talk us through, maybe, was there a situation where you had an anxious little kiddo and you were able to help them kind of get to the other side of that?
Yeah, so I was trying to think, a lot of times it's the breathing ball. You'll see them calm right down when they're watching it. But there was one little boy years ago. He was 5. He was in kindergarten. And he had some diverse abilities, special needs that hadn't been met yet because he was 5. And he was very dysregulated a lot. And one day I walked into the classroom. I've had that class every week for a long time. So I'm not sure how far into the year it was, but one time I walked into the classroom and he was sitting in his cubby in timeout, and he was upset and he was anxious because he was going to miss yoga. And I said to him, "What's wrong?" And because he was right there when I walked in, and I said, "What's wrong?" And he said, "Miss Colleen, I got in trouble and I need to calm down, but I can't." And he said, "Will you do turkey breathing with me?" And it was something that we had learned. And so I said, "Of course I will." So we did it, and he calmed down, and then he was able to join in yoga. And that was just, I always tell that story when I lead my trainings, because to me, that showed me that he knew what he needed to do. He knew that it would help, but he needed help doing it. He needed the support. And that's what we do. And it was such a great moment because and then he was able to move on, and have the rest of his day. So,
yeah. And I was just thinking, like, it can be so frustrating at times. I know my daughter, I just kept thinking when she was little, she was so anxious. Like I said, she was in the nurse and, just her behaviors. And I just kept thinking, gosh, if only she could take a deep breath, if only she could practice mindfulness, if only, if only. But you know what? She's on her own path, right? And so she was not yet available to these tools and strategies. She wasn't yet able to even identify her big emotions. So I know that her occupational therapist was saying there's just no point even talking about strategies until she's sort of able to understand what's happening for her. So that's interesting too, that this boy, he was able to recognize it and he understood the strategy, but not all children are. And so I think there's a place for grace as well, and acceptance, and knowing that you're holding space for them to arrive when they're ready, right?
right. And being there to remind them. I mean, so he was 5 and he knew that, but I've had kids, and my son being one of them, at 18 having a meltdown over something school related, like a math that you can't do, and having to remind them and take them through the steps. Because when we get in that kind of fight or flight mode, that high, super reactive, our brains sometimes still need, to have that reminder.
Yeah, exactly. So what would what advice do you have for teachers? That so many of us are up late at night, and what's the old saying that teachers the only people that stay up night worrying about other people's children? So what do you say for those educators who are really also worried about their anxious children, right? So they're taking on the anxiety themselves, whether or not they had that before pandemic. Of
Right.
course, we're going to be concerned about the population in front of us now.
Well, one thing is what you've said a couple times is to take care of yourself, and do some of these activities, find something, do yoga, do mindfulness, do running, whatever it is that you can do to help your own anxiety, because the kids will feed off of them as well. And I know that that's helped me, because when one of my kids is anxious, as parents, you kind of take on their emotions like double time. You feel it for them and for you. And that's really hard. So I have to make sure I have my strategies in place too. So making sure that you're taking care of yourself, and then finding something, one breath, just start with belly breath and start doing that every day with the kids. It can be just a minute. A lot of places have morning meetings. So starting to have a breathing ball, or just learn a different breath every day, knowing that if one breath isn't going to be good for everybody, somebody else might like a different one. But giving them those opportunities, making glitter bottles with the kids, or making one, having, a lot of places have calm down corners. That's great too. Making sure that they know how to use it and when to use it. But really just, having, even if you did some breathing and washing machine and then watch the glitter bottle, that's a great little sequence. You can do that in 5 minutes.
Right.
And if you set that tone at the beginning of the day, or even just one of those, and then maybe you do like washing machine before a test or after state testing, or you do the glitter bottle when they come back from lunch and they need to settle. finding activities that you can do throughout the day. Some people think they don't have time for it. I hear that a lot. But if you build in the time and they're just little micro minutes like that, but your class becomes more regulated and easier to settle, you'll actually save time in the long run.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to mention that the three ideas that you brought up they're not going to take a lot of time, right? It's not like you have to add anything more or buy a bunch of materials or, I even find someone had recommended like a mindful looking, like a bubble thing on YouTube, but just getting on YouTube and doing the projector and, all that takes time. Whereas if I just had the glitter bottle, I'm just doing it right there. Right. And so, yeah, it doesn't have to take a lot of time. I love that. That's great. Oh, thank you so much, Colleen. It's been such a joy talking to you. And I think this is something that, it's not going away. I
No.
think that we're in a place of noticing what's happening, and now we're sort of in the getting curious about what's going to work, and then it's going to come to a place of like acceptance. And it is what it is, and we have to meet children where they're at. We live in a very pitta world where there's a lot of ADHD everywhere. If you say that, right, there's a lot happening, even if you yourself don't have a diagnosis of ADHD as a child or an adult. That's the life we live in, right? And so I think we need to face it head on as yoga educators and say, okay, this is what it is. It's not going away tomorrow. What can we do? What little things can we do to make a difference? So I really appreciate you offering us some little tidbits that we can start tomorrow. Yeah. So where can we find you online if we want to learn? Do you have any trainings, or tell us your website or social or?
Yeah, so I do the trainings through ChildLight Education Company. So we'll start our next round of trainings in January. The dates are not solidified yet, but I'll be doing the yoga and mindfulness for children teacher training. That's our generalized for 2 through 12-year-olds. And then I'll be doing another one. That's not confirmed yet. And then through ChildLight, we have a lot of online it's a company called Teachable, or that's our link. And I just put up a Let's Talk About Anxiety workshop.
Oh, brilliant.
Anybody, including parents, because I wanted to take these little quick things, but also and have them in one spot, also with a lot of resources that because I kind of pull from everywhere, and I wanted to kind of consolidate so that people can have a good understanding of what anxiety is and how they can help. So that's up there. We have online trainings. There's online classes. A lot of my classes, I recorded a lot during COVID. I'm going to move for the light. Goodness. So there's a lot of classes for people of all ages on there. And I have some series of classes on there too. So that's where you can mostly find me. You can also on Instagram, I'm BeLive Yoga Kids. Sometimes people will put an E in there and call it BeLive, but it's BeLive Yoga Kids. On Facebook, I'm just me, Colleen Smith.
Okay, great. Awesome. Oh, beautiful. Thank you so much. I so appreciate you being with us today. And I look forward to watching your journey and connecting further. Thanks, Colleen.
Thank you.
See you.